I'm joined here in the studio by Scott Lasensky, researcher at the Institute of National Security Studies and senior advisor to former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Dan Shapiro. Scott, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jonathan.
And I want to ask you about the extreme optimism, I'll call it this way, not only here, but in Saudi Arabia as well. Everyone's happy. Everyone's talking about it as a successful trip, which it probably is, and we're probably going to hear more of that tomorrow. What's going to happen Wednesday once the Middle East is gone as far as Trump? He'll be away in the Vatican. Is everyone going to be happy and optimistic come Wednesday?
That's a good question, Jonathan. You'll have to roll up your sleeves and get to work. The trip itself is a trip without a real anchor. It's not a transactional trip. The president's not here negotiating peace or trying to end a war. He's here to turn a page. It seems there's still a tremendous overhang of the Obama administration, seems to be sort of hanging over, not just for him, but some of the leaders he's meeting with in Saudi Arabia, in Israel, who weren't terribly pleased with President Obama at the end of his term. It's 4 months into President Trump's administration, but there's still this tremendous sense of him trying to differentiate himself from President Obama. And I see the trip very much in that context. I think when this trip is over and he's back in Washington, it's time to close that chapter. And there's only so long he can define himself as not Barack Obama. There are huge questions facing the region, from how to end the war in Syria, a disastrous civil war that's been sucking in virtually all the neighbors and spitting out a refugee problem that the Middle East hasn't seen in over half a century. Iran's aggression, a stalemated Israeli-Palestinian peace process, a war in Yemen that's pulling in other parties all around the Gulf area. There's a lot going on. The president's not addressing much of this directly on his trip. He's getting to know leaders. He's trying to get a feel for the region. He hasn't been here, hasn't spent a lot of time here, didn't come on the campaign. He's trying to get to know the publics and the leaders here, and they're trying to get to know him, and the real hard work starts when he gets back.
Now, we're hearing of common dangers. Both leaders spoke of common dangers. Is that Iran, only Iran, or is there something more?
It's not clear. The rhetoric, the accent, we'll say, in President Trump's remarks in Saudi Arabia and in Israel seems very different. You'd think he'd be going 180 degrees on virtually all the policies of his predecessors. And yet there's a lot of continuity. He's committed to the nuclear agreement with Iran, the P5+1 agreement.
Though he does not like it. He did say it, people in the administration said. But
again, the rhetoric and the accents are all kind of different, but he's continuing it. What he's asked for of Israelis and Palestinians in terms of their conflict, it's largely what President Obama was asking for towards the end: continued security cooperation, a slowdown on settlements, economic measures by Israel to help Palestinians kind of breathe a little, some involvement of the neighbors. Looks more or less the same. Maybe
not much of a difference from the former administration. Scott, I want to get back to you and say that we have heard in that joint statement earlier, both leaders speaking about the subjects they agree on. They did not speak on the subjects they disagree on, and we know they exist. When will that surface?
Well, to just take the Palestinian question, Prime Minister has expressed his desire for peace and to improve the current situation on many occasions in Washington and today. So has the President. But when it finally comes to the point where the U.S. starts asking the parties to take actions that are different from what they're doing today on economic issues, on security, on territory, on settlements, on a whole basket of issues, on maybe what the terms of reference might be for renewed negotiations, I think you'll see the differences surface there. And a lot of them are going to be the same fault lines we saw under President Obama. I mean, it's a new American president, but the same two leaders, same Israeli leader, the same Palestinian leader. They struggled for 8 years to try to have negotiations and a productive peace process. And other than the few months under John Kerry, 2013, 2014, they found it very hard even to have productive negotiations. So I think once we get beyond the affirmations of commitments toward peace and commitments to try to move forward, and you get down to hard bargaining and real concepts and plans, you're going to see a lot of differences surface. And then the questions are going to be, how bad does President Trump want this? How hard is he going to push? How much credibility is he going to put on the table? And what's he going to do when the parties say no?
And we may start to see the beginning of that tomorrow, obviously, when President Trump travels to Bethlehem to meet President Abbas. Obviously, he'll have to say some things that are comfortable to the Palestinian ear. And Scott, so tomorrow comes the Palestinian Authority leg of this tour. How are they even seeing President Trump? Because on the one side, we know Obama was not very popular in the Palestinian Authority either. Then came Obama, all these things he said during the campaign. But he's now popular among the Arab leaders. We saw how he was welcomed in Saudi Arabia, and we know he had close relations with the Jordanian king, the Egyptian president. How is he seen in the Palestinian territories?
First of all, how he's seen on the street and how he's seen by the leadership are two different things. But let's focus just on Abbas for a minute, on President Abbas. Fascinating. 5 months ago, you would have thought these two leaders would be on totally different planets. President Obama allowed this resolution to pass at the United Nations, heavily critical of settlements. John Kerry's speech, pushing hard for peace. Then comes a president who advocated against the UN Security Council resolution, wanted to sort of said he wanted to ban entry of Muslims, and so forth and so on. You'd think Mahmoud Abbas would be probably one of his
you'd think he'd be one of his least favorite characters, and
yet there's this strange sort of honeymoon. I'd say three factors. One, Palestinians, as Abbas knows more than anyone, are dependent on the U.S., on economic assistance, on the security assistance and security training, across a whole variety of metrics. They have a certain degree of dependency, number one. Number two, the regional politics have aligned in such a way where President Abbas's key regional neighbors and patrons, King of Jordan, the Saudis, President of Egypt, people he relies on for all sorts of things, political support, economic support, diplomatic cover, are pointing him toward Donald Trump and toward embracing this new administration. And third, to give some credit to President Trump, he's sounded a new tune since he's come into office, and he's spoken repeatedly about his commitment to peacemaking. He sent an envoy out, Greenblatt, who has been listening. Listening is actually an art in diplomacy. It's the part of diplomacy they don't usually teach diplomats, and he's a good listener, and he's trying to get something moving on the economic front. So I think Trump's own earnestness and some of his signals, his warm reception for Abbas in Washington, the regional dynamics that are pushing Abbas toward Trump, toward giving him a chance, and third, his own sort of dependency and a deep reliance that the Palestinian Authority has on the U.S. and the role that it plays have all created this unlikely honeymoon period between Trump and Abbas. But that could change the next crisis, a war in Gaza, God forbid, or when Trump puts down a real...
Because Gaza is something no one's mentioning, but it's a problem that is there. It's not going anywhere.
Sure, and it's boiling, and it's just it's just over the horizon. Whether it's the salaries issues, the social metrics that show tremendous amount of stress. Hamas may want to assert itself in the ongoing inter-Palestinian struggle. There could always be a spark in miscommunication. Gaza is a very difficult situation. There's been a tempo of war and extreme violence every 2-3 years. We haven't had it for about 3 years, so if past this precedent, it could be a very hot summer. It's not clear that Donald Trump has a crisis prevention or a Gaza strategy. It's something that clearly will come up tomorrow in both of his meetings, and maybe we'll be surprised. Maybe we'll hear more from Donald Trump about Gaza and all these issues in his big speech tomorrow.
Interesting day coming ahead tomorrow. Scott Lasensky, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Jonathan.